I ask unanimous consent that we vitiate the quorum call and proceed as though in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, fairly recently, the President of the United States has nominated a candidate to head the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. His name is Debo Adegbile. And I'm here, Mr. President, this morning to explain to my colleagues why I believe that Mr. Adegbile is a very bad choice to run the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. But to make my case clear, I need to start with the story of a slain Philadelphia police officer. His name was Daniel Faulkner. This is a picture of Daniel Faulkner. And it's important to tell this story. The story begins 32 years ago. Many people have never heard this story. Others have perhaps forgotten since it was some time ago. But the fact is, Danny Faulkner can no longer speak for himself. And those who have tried to speak for him have often been drowned out by some powerful and wealthy voices that have had a political agenda that has perversely defended his killer rather than the memory of Daniel Faulkner. So the story begins, Mr. President, late at night on December 9th, 1981. It was actually the early morning hours. 25-year-old Philadelphia police officer Danny Faulkner stopped a car that was driving in Philadelphia. The driver got out of the car and began to assault Officer Faulkner. The driver's brother, Mumia Abu Jamal, was watching the incident from across the street. When he saw what was happening, and as Officer Faulkner attempted to handcuff the driver of the car, Abu Jamal ran up to the car and shot Officer Faulkner in the back. As Officer Faulkner was falling, he got off a shot, but the shot did not seriously wound Mumia Abu Jamal. Officer Faulkner then collapsed on the ground, and while he was lying on the ground, helpless and defenseless and severely wounded, Mumia Abu Jamal stood over him and pumped 4 more bullets into him, including a final bullet to the face that killed Danny Faulkner on the spot. Abu Jamal himself now was quickly apprehended. There were police that were just the next block over. They got there almost immediately. They arrested Mumia Abu Jamal. They took him to the hospital because he had been wounded, and while at the hospital, he bragged about the fact that he had just shot a police officer and stated that he hoped the officer would die. Well, given these facts, Mumia Abu Jamal's guilt was never in any serious question. But there was a trial. There were 4 eyewitnesses to the shooting. There were 3 other witnesses who heard Mumia Abu Jamal brag about the murder he had committed while he was in the hospital. In addition to that, there was ballistic and forensic evidence that made his guilt completely obvious to everyone. So it was not surprising that a jury took only 3 hours to convict Mumia Abu Jamal after the trial occurred. It took them a further 2 hours to sentence him to death. Then, instead of allowing Daniel Faulkner's young 24-year-old widow and his extended family to grieve in peace, a group of political opportunists decided that this would be the case that they would use to launch a campaign to further their political agenda. So they fabricated a whole set of claims that Mumia Abu Jamal was somehow framed. They spread lies about the trial. They organized rally. Amazingly, what they were doing was portraying Mumia Abu Jamal as the victim, when in fact he was unquestionably a cold-blooded murderer. It was part of a bigger campaign to turn Jamal into a celebrity and use him by those who had a political agenda to attack America's criminal justice system. Unfortunately, to a large extent, it worked. Jamal, the murderer, became somewhat of a celebrity in certain Hollywood circles. In Paris, they even named a street after him, and he had plenty of high-priced lawyers who just lined up to volunteer their time to jump on this cause and to just file endless series of appeals in a case that was an open and shut case. This, of course, among other things, had the effect of forcing Danny Faulkner's widow to relive this tragedy, this disaster for her, time after time, for decade after decade after decade. So this gross abuse of justice, this travesty of justice, had been going on for nearly 3 decades, when in 2009, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, or the LDF, decided to volunteer its time and considerable resources and its donors' funds to join in this fray, to join in this travesty, initially as an amicus to the trial, and then as co-counsel. Mr. President, the President's nominee to run the Civil Rights Division, Mr. Debo Adegbile, was the person responsible for the LDF's decision and its behavior in this outrageous set of circumstances. See, at the time, he was the LDF's director of litigation, and as Mr. Adegbile told our own Senate Judiciary Committee during his testimony, and I quote, he said he supervised the entire legal staff at the LDF. That was 18 lawyers. He was also, in the words, if you look at the LDF's website, he was responsible for, and I quote, providing leadership and coordination regarding both litigation and non-litigation legal advocacy. He was also, again, according to the LDF's own description, he was responsible for the LDF's advocacy both in the courts of law and in the court of political opinion. So all of the legal and public and political actions that LDF was taking, it was taking under the direction, the supervision, and the authority of Mr. Adegbile. And this is important to understand this. There's a very clear legal principle that a supervising lawyer has responsibility for the actions undertaken by the lawyers that report to him. That is the case in these circumstances, as well as the fact that the LDF openly acknowledges this. So what is it that the LDF lawyers then did in the circumstances of this case? Well, when they should have been pursuing their historic role in providing truth and justice for American people, they were advancing neither cause. It's also important to point out that this was never a case of a criminal deserving a legal defense. Criminals do deserve appropriate legal counsel in their defense. The fact is, the trial had occurred decades ago. Abu Jamal had multiple high-cost lawyers volunteering their time. He had plenty of lawyers. He didn't need more lawyers. What Mr. Adegbile did was he decided to join a political cause. That's what he decided to do. That's what this was all about. And in my view, by doing so, he demonstrated his own contempt for, and frankly, a willingness to undermine the criminal justice system of the United States. Under Mr. Adegbile's oversight, the LDF lawyers spread misinformation about the trial, about the circumstances, about the jury. He promoted division and strife among the American people and blocked justice for Danny Faulkner and Danny Faulkner's family. These LDF lawyers promoted the myth that Mumia Abu Jamal was somehow a heroic political prisoner, that he was framed. In fact, he was a coward and an unrepentant murderer. Under Mr. Adegbile's oversight, in January of 2011, the LDF issued a press release decrying what I quote as the grave injustices embodied in Abu Jamal's case. In May of 2011, 2 of the lawyers reporting to Mr. Adegbile traveled to France for a rally on behalf of this murderer, Mumia Abu Jamal. One of these LDF lawyers said she was, quote, overjoyed that Abu Jamal's death sentence was suspended, but bemoaned the fact that he would not have a new trial so that he could be set free. Another LDF lawyer described Abu Jamal as one of the, quote, people who are innocent but will continue to be put to death in America. Later, the same lawyer would falsely state that there was an absence of forensic evidence tying Abu Jamal to Officer Faulkner's death. The fact is, there was forensic evidence. There were 4 eyewitnesses to the murder. There were 3 witnesses to the subsequent bragging by Abu Jamal about the murder. At another rally, again, celebrating this murderer, one of the LDF lawyers supervised by Mr. Adegbile, gushed, "It is absolutely my honor to represent Mumia Abu-Jamal." This attorney went on to say, quote, "There is no question in my mind, and there is no question in the mind of anyone at the Legal Defense Fund, that the justice system has completely and utterly failed Mumia Abu-Jamal." Mr. President, I have to say, I agree that the justice system failed, but the justice system failed Danny Faulkner, not Mumia Abu-Jamal. So now we are faced with a situation where an individual who is directly responsible for some of these terrible injustices that have been done in the wake of Danny Faulkner's murder, he's been nominated to a high-ranking position at the Justice Department. And the Civil Rights Division is an extremely important division within the Justice Department. The head of this division plays a very, very important role. And what is his responsibility? Well, according to the division's website, Civil Rights Division, quote, "fulfills a critical mission in upholding the civil and constitutional rights of all individuals," end quote. Of course, this requires that the head of the Civil Rights Division have an absolute commitment to truth and to justice. I do not believe that Mr. Adegbile's nomination is consistent with the goal of promoting truth and justice in America. I do not believe that Mr. Adegbile's nomination is consistent with respect for America's legal system and rule of law, and I do not believe that Mr. Adegbile's nomination is consistent with justice for the family of Officer Danny Faulkner or for anyone else who cares about the law enforcement community across this country. For these reasons, Mr. President, I will oppose Mr. Adegbile's nomination to head the Civil Rights Division, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.